At this time, I will turn it over to, I just lost my page, to, I know it's Reverend Dr. Michelle.
Thank you, Felisa. My dissertation advisor was Reverend Dr. Dale P. Andrews. He was the MLK professor at Boston University for many years, till he went to Vanderbilt and died a few years ago. He would really correct you if you did not put that P in there. Dale P. Andrews. So anyway, I just had that I wanted to say. Much beloved person in my life, and MLK Sunday is a very important day for me. For that reason, he had a great influence on my life. Please turn to your number 584 in your gray hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, and we will read together A Network of Mutuality, which was written by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Let's read this all together. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. And let's read together the covenant in our order of service as well. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace with respect and understanding, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve our fellows and humankind, to the end that all souls shall grow together in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God, by whatsoever name we worship. Our opening hymn is number 210 in your gray hymnal, Wade in the Water. It's an African-American map song with biblical themes that Harriet Tubman used to disguise instructions for escape by slaves, including wading in the water to throw off dogs and trackers. Let's rise in body or spirit as you're willing and able for number 210.
I'm going to tell a story remembering Martin Luther King. Like Michelle, Martin Luther King had a big influence on my life. I came of age, my first few years in school were in Dallas, Texas, and it was a segregated school system, and those of us who were American Indian went to our own separate place. And I knew young people who were African American and people who were, I get, what's that word for you have to describe the descendants of Europeans? I can't remember. But it was segregated. So when we moved to Massachusetts, I was 12, I was 12. And at 13, the Montgomery bus boycott began. And I listened, and I saw it on television, and it was a big influence on me. I had come up from Texas, and the kids in Massachusetts called me Howdy. Howdy, because that's what they were trying to mimic my way of talking, and I felt kind of lonely. But as I was talking about what was happening in Montgomery with the other kids, I started to develop friendships, and we would really follow it and talk about it, and it was important. So by the time I was 15, Martin Luther King had moved on to other struggles, and I was in high school, and I had developed a whole group of friends in the Liberal Religious Youth, the youth organization, and in high school to talk about what was important to me, the civil rights movement in the South. And we talked about it every week. Another memory I have is now I am no longer 13, I'm 26. And I'm an organizer in New York, working for a trade union. And the news comes that Martin Luther King had been shot. And we immediately recognized that we had to get together with other organizers to organize a massive demonstration, nonviolent demonstration in New York. And we did. And it was it took 2 days, but the demonstration was one of the biggest in New York, and there was no violence in New York, no breaking of windows, which happened in many other cities, because there was an organized effort to create what Martin Luther King would have wanted, a nonviolent demonstration of concern and power. And so those two influences have been a very important part of my life. Very important part of my life, because I've understood that if you need to organize to create nonviolent protest, it doesn't come spontaneously. People left to their own become angry and throw rocks. But if it's organized, people will engage in nonviolent, determined, massive demonstrations and witness. So those are my remembering Martin Luther King, which were important parts of my who I am. Those help.
As I went down to the rivers to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down,
are called this weekend to reflect on what would Martin Luther King do in these times. A group of interfaith leaders have written a letter calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, endorsed by and released to the press as a joint letter with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley tomorrow for Martin Luther King Day in her travels around our state. Representing themselves as individual clergy, Reverend Clyde and Reverend Michelle have signed on to this letter and have asked me to read it for you all this morning. On this day, we commemorate the legacy of a man whose words and actions echoed the principles of justice and peace. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. As we reflect on his contributions to and sacrifices for the pursuit of collective liberation and freedom, it is imperative that we extend the spirit of his message to regions around the world where injustice persists. We are speaking of the ongoing and deeply rooted struggle for peace in Israel and Palestine, a land held sacred by so many faith traditions. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 15th, 2024, will be exactly 100 days since October 7th, 2023. In these 100 days, we have seen tens of thousands of innocent civilians killed. In Israel, we saw entire families murdered and entire communities destroyed, while many are still being unjustly held hostage in Gaza by Hamas. In Gaza, we have seen thousands of Palestinian children slaughtered, hospitals brimming with injured in the tens of thousands, and places of worship in rubble. We have seen children bury their parents, parents come home from buying bread to find their children and families killed in bombings. We have seen hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced from their homes, uncertain of where they will find food, water, or shelter from the rain and snow. This conflict is not new. It is a chain reaction of violence and trauma that leaves a trail of sorrow and hardship for families in both Palestine and Israel. Dr. King stated, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." These words resonate with a timeless truth, especially now. Those of us who love peace, as Dr. King loved peace, have a choice to make. We can either stand silently by as hate begets hate, as we witness violence based on retribution and endless occupation, actions that will inevitably lead to generations more of war, bloodshed, lives lost, and mutually assured destruction. Or we can advocate for actions that will lead to a future of peace, freedom and safety for Israelis and Palestinians alike, a future free from the violence we are seeing unfold. We know that the release of all those held captive and a permanent ceasefire is the beginning of a journey toward this future of lasting and just peace. It is easy to only witness this violence today through the screen of a phone and consider it unchangeable. But today we cannot afford to underestimate the power of grassroots movements, especially those centered on our shared love for humanity as people of faith. Dr. King warned us of the three evils in society of poverty, racism, and militarism, and he taught us the transformative impact that collective voices can have on shaping the arc of history. As King declared, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. In this moment of challenge, let us stand with those calling for an end to the loss of innocent lives. As we commemorate Dr. King's legacy, let us recommit ourselves to the belief that life is precious through demanding a ceasefire, which is the best way to save lives, return all hostages, and deliver the humanitarian aid desperately needed in Gaza. We recall that Dr. King reminded us, We still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. We must move past indecision to action. So today we refuse to be silent or stay caught in indecision. Every day without a permanent ceasefire, the number of the dead and the scale of destruction grows. History shows us that violence will only lead to more violence. The only way forward is to follow the path of peace. Ceasefire now.
I invite everyone to find a comfortable way to sit in your pew for a moment of quiet meditation and prayer. And just to bring your attention first to your breath. We forget, we're so busy during the day, just to give some gratitude to the breath that is the source of life. If there are any parts of your body that are feeling sore or tense, just invite those parts to relax if they're willing and able. And apply a warm, healing attention if they can't quite relax fully. You can bring your shoulders up, drop them down, roll your neck. We hold a lot of tension often in that part of our body. And let the muscles of your face soften and relax. And if you can let a half smile come to your lips as I invite our bell to sound 3 times. And we'll sit quietly for a few moments, and then I'll invite it to sound again, and we'll have a moment of prayer. God of many names and no names, many genders and no gender, and whom we know within our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition as a precious and mysterious spirit of life and love that moves in us and among us and out into our larger world, bringing our faith values and actions out into this larger world. This morning we are grateful to be together again, whether in person or through Zoom, for all the love and work of this congregation, the care that you give to one another, and the passion that you bring to building a world of justice and care in the larger community, the beloved community that Martin Luther King spoke to and whom we honor today in particular. We hold in our thoughts and prayers those who are not able to be with us today due to illness or who are recovering from illness. We hold those among us who have had losses of different ways and types recently. And because our hearts are so big and our faith is so big, we also hold all that is going on in our larger world. So much happening on the news that we turn away at times. It is too much. It is indeed too much. And it is also important not to turn fully away, to witness, to be with, and take the actions that each of us can, and that are magnified when we take these actions together. May we work towards the larger world of peace, beloved community, justice, and equity that was the vision that Martin Luther King Jr. held before us. May we be challenged by that vision and live into it. Blessed be. Amen. Normally, we've been preaching from the floor, and we're tending to use the high pulpit these days for what we might think of as holy days, high holy days. So you saw Clyde and I up here for Christmas, and I personally regard the Martin Luther King holiday as a high holy day for Unitarian Universalists. The Beacon Press got special permission to reprint Martin Luther King's writings, and it is something to think about that Martin Luther King Jr. had said. Coretta reported that he had said once that they would be Unitarian Universalists except for the fact that they didn't believe they could build a mass movement for African Americans if they were Unitarian Universalists at the time. So I am up here today on behalf of Martin Luther King Jr. as well as my advisor, the late Reverend Dr. Dale P. Andrews. A little over 10 years ago, and after Obama had been elected for a second time, General Mills created what they thought would be a non-controversial ad for their Cheerios product. This ad featured a biracial couple and their very sweet little girl. In this ad, an adorable little dark-skinned girl asks her white mother what was the meaning of the Cheerio box saying it is heart healthy. And then she runs and pours out the Cheerios on the chest of her black father, sound asleep on the couch, waking him up with a startle and implying her desire for his heart to remain healthy. How many of you remember that ad? Yeah. Well, this ad was the source of, fostered a huge backlash of negative commentary on interracial relationships and on interracial marriage. Later, as part of their Kids React video series, the Fine brothers interviewed a group of children from different ethnic and racial backgrounds reacting to this negative backlash against the Cheerios ad. Uniformly, the children were bewildered as to why this ad would have caused negative reactions by people, saying things like, "Why?" with shock, or "You're kidding me." These kids, all good-hearted in their worldview, had been raised in their public education and liberal families, like Midwestern me from Ohio, with a whitewashed version of Martin Luther King Jr. They were raised with the dream of a colorblind society that was reduced simply to a vision of positive race relations. They were rightfully shocked when presented with evidence of the negative commentary. They lacked tools and language to understand the persistence of systemic institutional and cultural structures of racism and oppression, systems and structures that MLK knew all too well in his life, and which in the end were responsible for taking his life. The most striking and explicit example in the Kids React video by the Fine brothers was a young white boy who commented, "I thought Martin Luther King spoke against this and fixed it already." Now, this video is still available on YouTube if you'd like to search for it, along with a lot of other YouTubes in relationship to it. I used to use it in the Racial Justice and Cultural Oppressions course I taught at Boston University's School of Social Work for many years. Pedagogically, it demonstrates how the stock story of MLK as a proponent of colorblindness and racial civil rights has been passed down through the educational system and families over the many years since his assassination, keeping our focus on interpersonal dimensions of racism. The concealed and hidden story of an increasingly more radical MLK focused on nonviolent national economic disruption by the end of his life is not taught, to the detriment of our children and our country. We can witness to this fact by those who were shocked by what happened at our nation's capital on January 6th in 2021, as well as those who remain shocked by the rise of ongoing threats to democracy here in this country and in our larger world. The violence embedded in the root founding of this country, with the genocide of indigenous people and enslavement of Africans and others, bear legacies that we have yet to address. There is much work to be done, and this will take a deepening into MLK's legacies in new and richer ways beyond the inclusion of only one reading by MLK in our hymnal. That's it. That's the only one in our hymnal that's ever been included in a hymnal. Bearing witness to MLK's legacies with our only one federally recognized holiday is also insufficient. The long weekends that we have become used to with Mondays as federally recognized holidays was established in Congress in 1968 with the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. And more often these become associated with opportunities for shopping than real connection to the meaning of these holidays. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was established much later, and it fell right into the Monday pattern since it was meant to celebrate King's birthday, which does in fact happen to be tomorrow, January 15th, but it doesn't always fall on his birthday. Irony of ironies, given the long-range impact of his policies for the poor, MLK was signed into law in 1983 by then President Ronald Reagan. Yet it took until the year 2000, for all 50 states to recognize MLK Day by name, rather than some trying to call it something else or combine it with other holidays. You should feel some parallels with what we're struggling with for Indigenous Peoples Day today in Massachusetts as well, and I'm very happy that the Parish Committee has endorsed the 5 bills of the Massachusetts Indigenous legislative agenda. It took a lot to get MLK Day recognized as a federal holiday, and doing so was a countercultural action during that period. At the time of Martin Luther King's murder, he was organizing a Poor People's Campaign and a march on Washington, D.C., and actively working with labor unions to go beyond his former nonviolent tactics of boycotts, demonstrations, and sit-ins. Today, the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber and others are fulfilling MLK's radical vision of the Poor People's Campaign movement. Yet, even today, Reverend Dr. Barber, a former leader of the NAACP and the inheritor of MLK's national legacy, can be threatened with arrest for simply trying to make an accommodation for his own physical disability in order to go see The Color Purple with his 90-year-old mother. He was removed by police from an AMC theater in Greenville, North Carolina. And yeah, you can go look that one up, okay? Go look that one up when you get home. While never losing his Christian-centered hope and vision of the beloved community, King had become progressively more and more radicalized by witnessing the structural mechanisms enforcing militarism, racism, and poverty in America. He realized that real structural change was going to need a new strategy of nonviolent sabotage and creative disorder, his language, a strategy of massive civil disobedience. This was not our Unitarian friend David Thoreau's quiet, individualized civil disobedience. This was organized, mass civil disobedience, planning to tie up major cities at the point of their economic centers and forcing radical attention and change on behalf of the poor, regardless of race or ethnicity. Now, we hear little of this radical dimension of Martin Luther King in our media and breakfast celebrations of his life, one Monday a year. Just as we minimize Rosa Parks and her lifelong participation in NAACP community organizing, preferring often to think about her as this sweet older woman who just suddenly got tired and fed up and refused to give up her seat on a bus. That's not a true story. Hopefully you know that. This is often what happens when famous figures are co-opted by the dominant cultural system and celebrated with national holidays, through which political and social leaders can then be selectively lifted up in celebration of some historical aspects of their lives, but not others, not the totality of who they were. Those who fought hard initially to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a holiday were definitely in touch with this deeper and richer history, namely labor unions, who fought hard to make recognition of MLK Day a holiday as part of their contract negotiations and strike walkouts in the 1970s, long before it became the focus of a Stevie Wonder song and the largest petition campaign in Congress in U.S. history, 6 million signatures collected. Followed ironically today, despite this labor union history, with corporate sponsorships. Again, one cannot help but smile at the good-hearted innocence with which the Kids React children vigorously protested against the insanity of negative responses to this Cheerios ad. This is the positive aspect of hope for a colorblind society. There's something positive there. Yet we as adults, particularly as Unitarian Universalists, need to ask if we have really prepared our children and ourselves for the world in which we live. Our world house, as King would come to call it at the end of his life. A world house that remains an extension of all that remained structurally unresolved in Martin Luther King's lifetime and struggles. At the end of his life, Martin Luther King retreated to Jamaica. He left behind civil rights work here happening. He went on a retreat to Jamaica to write his final manuscript of his life. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And he came to realize that we are all truly globally interdependent, that struggles for freedom from oppression and toward beloved community must occur in our shared world house. To what degree has each of us bought into the stock stories of MLK and failed to learn from and follow his later developments and his deepening understanding of the intersections of race, class, militarism, and neocolonialism in a global context beyond the United States? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is not an idealistic, wistful figure to be relegated to the past and a failed dream of integration. There was a reason why the FBI regarded him at the time as the most dangerous man in America. That's the film that we'll be watching together next week. It's a danger to reduce him. The relevance that he carries for today's world of Black Lives Matter, white supremacist insurrections at our nation's capital, threats to transgender people and reproductive rights, the devastation in the Middle East, and increasing threats of war everywhere, the migrant crisis, and the looming climate catastrophe. Now, MLK's lived experiences with oppressed persons in northern cities as well as globally, including Vietnam, began to push him into an analysis of the global underpinnings of racism, poverty, and violence in this country and beyond, and to advocacy for a larger scale of nonviolent action and mass civil disobedience. For example, in 1967, Martin Luther King made a report called The Crisis in American Cities to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and you can find that report on the website of the King Center. In this report, he argued for the need for mass, disciplined, direct, nonviolent action aimed at disrupting northern cities and their normal way of doing business. Nonviolence was personally important to MLK as a religious and spiritual belief. Yet, like Gandhi, he also saw tremendous potential in its use as a political strategy. And he grew in his perspective on what would be required to effect structural change in the larger society and world beyond his experiences in the South. He would write, "Nonviolent action in the South was effective because any forms of social movement by Negroes upset the status quo. When Negroes merely marched in southern cities, it was close to rebellion. In the urban communities, marches are less disquieting because they are not considered rebellions, and secondarily, because the normal turbulence of cities absorbs them as merely transitory drama, which is ordinary in city life." Reflect on those words. He continued, "To raise protest to an appropriate level for cities and to invest it with aggressive but nonviolent qualities, it is necessary to adopt civil disobedience. To dislocate the functioning of a city without destroying it can be more effective than a riot because it is longer lasting, costly to the society, but not wantonly destructive. Moreover, it is more difficult for government to quell it by superior force. Massive civil disobedience can use rage as a constructive and creative force." End quote. Similarly, King grew in his understanding that America's crisis with racism and poverty is linked to a global history of colonialism and military conquest. Nothing less than a moral and spiritual turning of the heart of all peoples in what he termed our world house would do for our times. What does this mean to those of us who are Unitarian Universalists? How do we participate in this moral and spiritual turning of the hearts of our nation? There is twofold work that continues to need to be done. First and foremost, for those of us who are racialized as white, something is done to us, we are racialized as white, there is a significant uprooting that we need to continue to engage around our own racialization as white people. the meaning of this and how it shapes both our responses and our lack of responses or lack of engagement at times. Again, we witnessed this in how a white-led insurrection at our nation's capital was met differently than if it had been a black or brown-led insurrection at our nation's capital. We can be assured that such an insurrection would have been met with violent suppression, as it has been in history. We also need to understand the deep intertwining of class and race in this country, and how we bring stereotypes to who we believe are leading these insurrections. This is not a raised, poor, white working class insurrection. This is a white, middle, and upper class led insurrection and funded insurrection. So educating ourselves and engaging deep work with our own implicit biases is needed first and foremost. From this position then, from understanding, again, how something has been done to us and taken from us as well in our racialization as white, albeit very differently from those who are racialized as brown or black or red or yellow. Okay. From that position, we can find the ground for the second move that's needed. A radical love to be more engaged politically and active in our larger world on behalf of democracy and creating a shared vision for our country and our larger world house, one that will be authentic to our history and sustain and nurture us together in our shared future. Next week, UU Mass Action is our Faith in Action partner. Next week, Claire Carl Mueller will be here preaching about UU Mass Action. And we also have things such as the UU the Vote and other ways to be involved. But these are ways to be involved. And as Martin Luther King wrote in some of his final words, quote, "We are faced now with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. We still have a choice today, nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos or community." End quote. Unitarian Universalism is a faith that can lead us and sustain us within our larger network of congregations and community ministries in this choice and this time. Our faith institutions are not only crucial in these times, they are necessary, including here, First Parish in Canton, and all of our neighboring congregations. They are necessary. May it always be so. Blessed be. Amen. Let's go read together our shared benediction found in your order of service. Shared benediction found in your order of service. And we believe in calling each other to worship and sharing in the benediction because we are the priesthood and the prophethood of all believers. May we go forth today as committed truth tellers about the real Martin Luther King Jr., the king who was a radical for love, the king who did not dream with his eyes closed, but who visioned an interdependent world of justice and equity. May we remember the king who challenged each of us to be awake, to take risks, and to embody a bold new vision, a beloved community for all. And let's read together our unison chalice extinguishing. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'm going to play what was known to be Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite song, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, sometimes referred to as Take My Lord, Take My Hand, Precious Lord. He was especially happy when Mahalia Jackson sang it, and this is, I think, a beautiful arrangement of that beautiful song.
Thank you.